else I accomplished or didn't accomplish next.
Well, the internet says you didn't accomplish enough.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, we should always listen to the internet.
This is real life. This feels so strange.
Yeah.
To actually be here with real people. Such a good experience.
This is the first time I've seen Jason.
Yeah.
Miles
This is the first time that we
so
physically met. But Ben and I, it's a whole different story.
Yeah, no, he's like the Jay and Silent Bob phrase, hetero life partner. That's Jason Miles for me. I've met Jason a million times, but yeah, these guys have not had the Jason Miles experience yet. This is a new thing for them.
Now everyone gets the Jason Miles experience.
There we go.
Whatever that is. From a distance.
Oh, that's
a safe distance.
That sounds so creepy. All right, let's move this on, maybe. Let's get to the beginning of our actual material. And look, we're going to do a few different things tonight. I think there's going to be a good mixture of topics. We're doing some like really in-depth stuff about foreign policy with Deep State Cuba, who people know from this revolution. We have, there's some philosophy in here. We're obviously going to do a thing at the end to remember our departed brother, Michael Brooks. But like also, you can't eat a dinner that's just vegetables. You gotta have some French fries on there. So we are going to start out with our bottomless pit of free content, Jordan Peterson. And Matt Leck has a couple of quotes, and this is going to be a fun game. This is an audience participation game. Yeah, I want to hear what you guys think. We're going to have some guests on in a minute to talk about Jordan Peterson. We're going to have a whole conversation about this. But first, we want you guys to guess. Who said this? Is this postmodern philosopher Jacques Derrida? Or is this our boy Jordan?
And I'll be doing it in a Jordan Peterson voice. So,
All right. That was a little bit of the live show that I did with Matt and David from Left Reckoning and Jason Miles from This Is Revolution in Los Angeles. Since the last episode that we've done of this, you want to listen to the whole thing, go over to patreon.com/Ben Burgis, become a GTAA patron. $5 a month. You get that. You get post games after every regular Monday night episode, and you get our eternal love and gratitude for keeping this thing going. But want to switch gears from the upper reaches of the philosophical stratosphere that we're about to go in with that game about Guess the Quote in the live show extract and talk about the 2022 midterm elections. So I am joined right now by our graphic designer, J. Andrew World. As always, we are not joined by our producer, Jake. He is feeling a little under the weather today. You will just have to wait for next week for your Jake fix. But who you do have is political journalist extraordinaire, Ross Barkan, who has been on the Collins show, but I think this is actually his first time on the main show on YouTube. And we also have an instance of the best kind of human being whose existence I'm aware of, which is the Atlanta-based Jacobin columnist. That would be Ryan Zickgraf. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing well.
I'm good. I have to say I'm probably less than Jake, but I'll do my best.
Fair enough. So I wanted to talk to you guys about a few different things. Obviously, we are a day out of the election, so this is the last chance that anybody gets to officially be wrong about what's going to happen for the record. But since it's something you've both written about quite a bit, wanted to pick both of your brains about it. I should say Ryan has a new piece out today about the election in Georgia. So this is called "A Democratic Star Fails Upward." So just since that is where I am, I'm especially curious about that. So Ryan, you want to just start us off with what's going on there?
Oh, Stacy. I live. You just showed the mural of Stacey Abrams there. I live about 12 blocks from that mural. Stacey Abrams is, sort of a hero here, even though she hasn't won an election. And I was trying to find this today. I couldn't find when she actually won an election last, because it was in the Georgia State House. What year was it? I know she resigned in 2017. I cannot find what year that she actually won, but she has not won an election in quite a while. She came close in 2018, but this time, even after she's gotten more money and more attention, I mean, she's raised an incredible amount of money, over $100 million for this campaign. But right now, looks like she's going to lose, and it's not looking good.
Yeah, I mean, you said in the article that at this point, given the polling, and she's well behind other Democrats running statewide, which and it's tells you something in itself. And you say it looks like she kind of need a miracle, which is like she was supposed to be the person who was going to provide the political miracles, not require them.
Yeah, and not only that, but there are signs that she is sort of looking past this election all of a sudden. I found it interesting that she pulled a lot of her TV money in the past week or two. She was pumping in something like $2.5 million a week in TV advertising, and Atlanta Journal-Constitution just reported that it's down to 800,000. So, I mean, with all this money, why all of a sudden are you putting on the brakes? Unless maybe you think you're going to lose and you're looking ahead towards maybe a presidential run in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. I guess if Beto O'Rourke could run for president on the basis of having almost won an election, there's no reason that Stacey couldn't.
And she's proven that she can make it rain. I mean, as our political system, there's more and more money involved, and she can raise an incredible amount of money. I think that's very attractive to the DNC.
And she was also the president of the Federation.
Yes.
Right. Fair enough.
By the way, her last election that she won was 2016, where there was no incumbent or no other person running. So there wasn't actually, even though she was on the ballot, there wasn't really a race.
Yeah. So I wonder when the last competitive race that she won.
Yeah. So
there hasn't been. I'm looking at the other years. Literally, it's just been her in District 18.
Interesting.
Or 84. I'm sorry. 80, yeah.
Okay. So I do want to. I mean, I'm going to go back to Georgia and do and do Herschel in a minute, but I do want to kind of broaden the scope a little bit. So Ross, one of the articles that you did on your Substack is called in 2016 in the air. Another one specifically about New York is how bad is it for New York Democrats? So I mean, what's your general sense of what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, I think Democrats in New York will perform better than they do in Georgia, but that's because the partisan lean of the state is much, much more Democratic. So certainly Kathy Hochul is slated to perform worse than any Democratic gubernatorial candidate probably in 20 years. That being said, she's still most likely getting over that 50% mark and getting somewhere, if below 60, still leading Lee Zeldin, her Trump Republican opponent, when the night is through. And Democrats have super majorities in the state Senate and the state assembly, the lower house. So very hard to lose those, especially in the assembly where the super majority is quite large. Very hard, I should say, to lose the majorities the supermajorities will be lost, those veto-proof
Mm-hmm.
supermajorities. But it is probable that come Wednesday in New York, the governor will still be a Democrat. The state legislature will still be in Democratic hands. The thing to really watch in New York beyond the governor's race is the House races. New York is an unlikely battleground, and I think it's pretty plausible that Republicans are going to win most of the toss-up House races in New York, and there's an outside shot they win all of them. I think it's going to be a very tough night. That would be my guess as of right now for Democrats in the House, certainly in New York and probably elsewhere too.
Yeah, well, how about the elsewhere? Like, how about the like the country as a whole? I mean, I've heard people say, well, I mean, like the Senate's a little bit trickier, but I mean the House, I don't know how optimistic I've heard anybody be about that.
No, I think that's pretty much gone. It seems almost impossible for Democrats to keep the House. I think the question now is, what is the margin going to be? How big historically will this wave be? I think Democrats quietly would be happy if the wave wasn't as bad as the Tea Party wave, or what the Republicans suffered in 2018, where I think they lost something like 40 seats. I'd have to look that up, but I think keeping it under 30 at this point would be a win for Democrats, and mitigating the apocalypse catastrophe of the red wave. And that's plausible. I think what is increasingly likely is Democrats lose the House. Absolutely. And I would, if you put a gun to my head and ask me what's going to happen with the Senate, the safer pick is Republicans flip it. I think that's the safest pick. It's not guaranteed, but it's just what seems more likely at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that one is like, because we are just talking about like a few seats that are really ambiguous what's going to happen. And, I mean, I guess the question, I mean, this is definitely not original to me. Lots of people said this, but like, but it just seems like, okay, so going back to Georgia, Herschel Walker seems like this like strange idiot who can barely express a thought, and apparently he's like the largest abortion provider in the state of Georgia, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz is like almost literally a snake oil salesman, and tortured a bunch of puppies, and has all these kind of personal negatives, but it really seems like the thing is like, okay, how much do you think those things about the characteristics of individual candidates are really going to matter? And like, how much is it just this sort of broad general national picture that seems really, really bad for Democrats right now?
Yeah. I would say on the margins, candidate quality definitely matters, but there's no doubt that we're in a period now in American politics where polarization means that a vast majority of voters are already sorted into their camps and are going to come home and vote for the party they prefer or vote against the party they don't like. I do think that Democrats are very lucky that Oz was the Senate candidate in Pennsylvania and it wasn't a more mainstream Republican who had held office before, or who is some type of businessman who they prefer. If there was a Republican candidate, let's say similar to the Democratic candidate Josh Shapiro, who's probably going to win the governor's race in Pennsylvania. If that sort of candidate was running, I think Fetterman would be in a lot more trouble. Same thing in Georgia. If you look at the partisan lean of the state in a year like this, Kemp is running way ahead of Abrams. I think that's Kemp's strength and also her weakness. If the Republican Party, through Donald Trump, had fielded a normal candidate who could win the primary, Warnock could be doomed off the bat. Mark Kelly could be doomed by a better Republican in Arizona, and still Blake Masters might win. You look at New Hampshire, Hassan's lucky to have Don Bolduc. She can still lose that race too. And even the Vance Ryan in Ohio, Vance is not a strong candidate at all, but the partisan lean of the state is what it is. So Vance is probably going to win. So overall polarization trumps everything. And the lean of the state, the environment, that matters the most. But I do think on the margins, the quality of the candidate can matter. And Democrats are actually having a pretty lucky cycle between the bad candidates, the fall of Roe v. Wade, which is a disaster for the country, but is probably still at least in the background helping Democrats avoid what could be probably a far worse defeat given how unpopular Biden is and given how anxious people are about inflation and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and anybody else wants to come in on this, like, I just think, okay, when the Dobbs decision first happened, or especially, was first leaked, and then when it actually happened, it seemed like it was going to make a big difference. And it doesn't really seem like Democrats have completely given up on that or given up on it at all. I mean, every day, I live in Atlanta. Every day I go to my mailbox and I throw out a bunch of mailers that are mostly telling me that if the Republicans win, they're gonna pass extreme anti-abortion laws. Which fair enough. That's not wrong, but like it really seems like the Democrats at a basic level, thought this was going to do it for them, or like still think that banging that drum is like the best thing they could do to avert catastrophe, and which maybe is better than the last thing, which was just trying to make the midterm election about Donald Trump, who's not president anymore. And January 6th and all this stuff. But I mean, you do sort of get this larger feeling from this that Democrats can't really let go of the idea that like there's just like one weird trick that if they just find the right one, then they can win the election without actually having anything that they can tell people that's like compelling about inflation and the sort of like bread and butter issues that are, I mean, if you look at what voters say to pollsters, do seem to be like the top line items.
Well, it's also hard. Like, would the Democrats really run the economy? I mean, even if like jobs totals are way up, what people are focused on the most is like inflation and what their bills are like. They don't really feel viscerally like unemployment numbers, So, it's hard for them to like run on the economy. And so like what else you got, the abortion one is a tangible issue that a lot of people care about, but yeah, it does feel a little bit like they're a one-trick pony here. That, and as you say, like the insurrection and that democracy is at risk.
Right.
It feels a lot like the Republican primary in 2016, where you had everybody but Donald Trump running against Obama. That wasn't the election that was happening.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it just, I understand it'd be like incredibly hard for Democrats to say anything compelling about it, because even though it's obviously complicated because of all the things that anybody's been paying attention to this stuff has been hearing about for 2 years about, Manchin and Sinema and, the parliamentarian, whatever, right? Like everything everything we've heard about, like, it is still on the most basic level. It kind of looks like Democrats are in charge of everything. So, whatever's going on, must be their fault. But I mean, also, it just seems like if there's just nothing you have to say about the thing that voters are most concerned about, it's really hard to see how that's going to go well for you.
Yeah, it's, I'll say this, being on the trail a bit and hearing some of the candidates, I wrote about the Hassan Bolduc race, New Hampshire, for New York Magazine, and just trying to watch campaign ads a bit and see what Democrats are talking about. They have been lately trying to bring it back to economics and also to talk about the accomplishments in the Biden Inflation Reduction Act, particularly also the CHIPS and Science Act. They've been talking up a lot, the infrastructure spending from last year. So I do think you see it on the candidate level that they are talking about it more. I just think, you have these dynamics that are now distressingly cyclical, where in, the first midterm, the party out of power, and probably the second as well, if whoever, if Biden's wins re-election in 24, if a Democrat does, you're going to probably see the same thing 2 years later. You just have this cycle of backlash. You saw it happen to Trump. It happened to George W. Bush in 06. It happened to Obama twice. And it just seems like there's like very like little you can do to avoid at least most of the backlash. There are definitely things you can do on the fringes and maybe to mitigate a bigger loss. But that's the distressing thing, at least I'm starting to see watching this more and more. I mean, I think messaging matters in these midterm environments. If you're on the defensive, you are kind of screwed out of the gate because Democrats are caught, either grasping at straws that voters don't care about, like January 6th. I mean, the Jan 6 stuff does not resonate at all with regular people, and I get why. Or abortion, which does resonate, but that alone can't resonate with gas prices and inflation. It just doesn't. Women care more about how much it costs to pump their, car if they have to drive somewhere than about abortion. That's just reality. And it's reality. You care more about the cost of bread or milk than, other issues. So Republicans don't have like a great message on here's how we will reduce inflation, right? Here's how we will get it under control. It's the Democrats screwed up. The Democrats are bad. Look at your 401k. Look at how much things cost. Look at your life right now and ask yourself, is it better or worse? And when you're on the offensive like that, you generally win because it's very simple and it's very easy for the voter to digest. Whereas Democrats are really caught in this muddle of, well, do we talk about abortion or Jan 6 or democracy or economics? And economics is the best answer. But even if you're talking more about economics, you're still on the defensive because the average voter says, well, you guys are running things, so why do we trust you to keep running them?
Yeah, right. For sure. I mean, although they could have, they did these big high profile January 6th hearings that they had they had like a PR firm, that was working with, the Democrats on it. They were organizing viewing parties, for the hearings. And I mean, I wrote this article with Danny Bessner about this for The Nation that look, they could have done that for price gouging, had similarly, I mean, I know there were some hearings, but similarly high profile hearings with where they were really pulling out all the stops to make this their big marquee thing, where they dragged executives, in front of the Senate and be like, well, look, on this earnings call, you said that you're making record profits right now. How come prices haven't dropped? And I don't know if that would have worked or not.
I agree with you definitely on the Jan 6 point. As it recedes further, I have less of a fear of cancellation in saying Jan 6 is entirely overrated by the Democratic Party. It was a terrible day and people died and it was scary. But the people most scared were those in Congress themselves. The American people themselves were somewhat insulated from all of it. I remember in the wake of Jan 6, I had people in my Twitter feed comparing it to 9/11, and I'm from New York. I still live in New York. I remember 9/11. Comparing Jan 6 to 9/11 to me was absolutely deranged. I mean, 9/11, it was a day we all remember. I thought the world was going to end. A lot of people did. It was surreal and horrific, and it changed the course of history. Jan 6, again, terrible in its own way. I think more for the implications of what could come, where do Republicans try to steal elections in the future? Though I think the more banal reality is Democrats can just lose the 2024 Electoral College and lose the Senate in a completely normal fashion of just not running as superior campaigns and the Republicans having advantages in both of those domains. So I do think that the Jan 6 obsession certainly sucked up oxygen from other matters. And there's no doubt you talk to any voter, Black, white, Asian, working class, middle class. I mean, even the affluent at this point, it just is not a top issue for anyone. But again, it reminds me of the whole Mean Girls thing, trying to make fetch happen. I mean, they're trying to make the Jan 6 happen as a campaign issue now for almost going on 2 years. It's not happening. And so I do think that was certainly time spent where time could have been spent elsewhere.
You know that when you talking about January 6th and 9/11 makes me think of something, and that if you remember back in like 2004, Bush, you know, it was kind of like a joke. I think that was even on SNL that he was like the president of 9/11. He was like 9/11, 9/11. That was like his answer to everything, you know, and that he was really using that to bolster his reelection. And it feels like for a while, maybe you know, is still the case, is that the Democrats seem to be trying to make Biden sort of the president of January 6th, you know, not that he was doing it, but that he was like a bulwark against those forces. And so it was something that they used over and over to be like, look, Biden, take care of January 6th and those extremists.
Go ahead if you want to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, Anna Kasperi in the chats, Dems spent most of their time in Jan 6 because the issue doesn't require any policy that would upset their vote, their donors. I think there probably is some truth to that. I'd also say that it's a dramatic event. And look, I don't want to undersell the fact that there's that, you know, the democracy is on the ballot stuff. I think there is some truth there. I think that it is look, we were talking before the show. Ryan, you know, mentioned that he actually can't vote right now because Georgia's, you know, ID requirements are such that, you know, that in his circumstances right now, you know, without going into the personal details, maybe, right, you know, he can't do it when other states with more reasonable voting laws, you know, it would be no problem. Right
yeah,
now.
I'm an illegal immigrant, so it's rough.
I guess if I were, you know, and I'm not a Democratic strategist, and I'm not, you know, invested on this in the pure partisan sense, but, you know, if I were, I would be much more concerned about losing elections. You know, the Democrats right now could lose the Senate tomorrow, or eventually if there's a runoff, whatever, see what happens, right? 2024 looks way worse. You've Sherrod Brown on the ballot in Ohio. You've Joe Manchin, who is reviled for a reason, but he's apparently the only Democrat who can hold a seat in West Virginia. That seat will flip, I'd say undoubtedly, with Trump or anyone at the top of the ticket in 24. You have Montana with John Tester. I don't know how you're going to hold that seat in a presidential year. You know, there's all this talk about democracy on the ballot, and yes, it's true. What's really on the ballot is the possibility of a Republican supermajority in the Senate in 2025 or 2026. I mean, this is the way I think Democrats should be thinking. Honestly, progressives and leftists too. You can't change the system as it is. The Senate, we all agree, right, or probably agree, that it's weighted toward rural states. It's weighted now toward, you know, white conservatives, just in the way it's all set up. The Electoral College is stupid. If you made a new political system from scratch, you would never use the Electoral College. You would never have a Senate. But it's here, right? It's not going to change. It's going to be here when we all die, and probably long after that. So you as a party or as Democrats, whatever, have to think, how do you win under those constructs? Back in 2008, they didn't care because they were cocky, and Obama won, and he almost got 60 seats in the Senate. It's like, wow, we can have senators in Montana and Iowa, and we can have an Arkansas senator. It's like, well, you can't anymore, or you can try to find your way back. I mean, the problem in rural areas is very real for Democrats. They know it. But for some reason, it's like, well, they know it, but then they want to talk about Jan 6th. Does anyone in Montana or Iowa or the Dakotas or any of these states, do they care about January 6th? And the answer is not really. And so the democracy on the ballot thing, it never quite moves me, because I just look at the map and go, well, no, actually what's on the ballot is you getting drubbed out of the Senate for a generation. And that's going to be the real challenge. Yeah.
I mean, I think that, look, so I'd separate out a little bit 3 issues. One is there a threat that Republicans will do things that undermine democracy? And the answer is yes. Second, is the most likely thing that would look like January 6th, right? Is that the sort of premonition of what that would look like? And I would say no. That was a horrible event, but but realistically, and I agree with you, Ross, but I think that the right? Democrats are fully capable of just losing fair and square without anything having to be stolen from them. But like, look, there have been stolen elections in America before. There could certainly be again. I mean, you mentioned 9/11. I'm old enough to remember the year before that, the Bush v. Gore election. But I think future stolen elections are much more likely to look like that than a somehow successful version of January 6th. They're much more likely to be, guys in suits who are operating within established institutions, a la the Bush v. Gore model. And then the last issue is just like, okay, so you don't want Republicans. One of many reasons you don't want Republicans to win is you're worried they'll do things that'll undermine democracy. Sure, fair enough. Same way that like one of the many reasons you don't want Republicans to win is that they're gonna further undermine abortion rights. Fair enough. But like, is talking about that all the time going to be the thing that actually stops Republicans from winning? And that seems like a completely separate issue.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always go back to Bernie 2016, not Bernie 2020. I think Bernie's instincts were correct about the electorate, about selling very ambitious ideas to an electorate that otherwise might be wary. He was someone who'd won in a rural state. He won in a state that was once pretty Republican, at least when he first won. I think his first congressional race came 2 years after George H.W. carried the state. And he understood you have to lead with an economics message, and you really have to understand that a lot of the country is not going to share your views on social issues. And I don't know why this has been a very hard lesson for Democrats of all stripes, from the moderates to the progressives to the squad. I mean, I think all sort of ideological factions of the party are guilty of this, of really not understanding that when it comes to social issues, America is just not a monoculture, and you've got to meet voters where they are. And that doesn't mean throwing certain groups under the bus, but it does mean tailoring your message, right? Or it does mean kind of understanding where the voter is. I always go back to the height of 2020. Bernie Sanders, I think very wisely, never supported the defund the police movement. At least he didn't fully support it, because he understood, as a former mayor of Burlington, we all have problems with police. I certainly do. I've written very skeptically police power. You're going to have police departments in cities and towns, right? You're going to have to pay these people. Honestly, some are paid very poorly, which is something Bernie brought up, and the squad left got furious at him. But it's true. You're recruiting some pretty lousy people into the department, and people who probably should be going into policing do not, because the pay is too low. And I know that's like a sidebar, but my bigger point is, if you think democracy is on the ballot, and we can all agree that it is to an extent, figure out a way to win, right? If you truly believe this, then you've got to have a plan for Montana, right? You've got to have a plan for Iowa. You've got to have a plan for winning over conservative Black and Hispanic voters. I mean, this is a real issue. You're seeing, Black men moving away from the Democratic Party slowly. You're seeing Latino voters moving very fast away from the Democratic Party. You're seeing Asian voters. I mean, where I am in New York, I think there's going to be a red wave tomorrow in a lot of Chinese-speaking communities in New York City. If democracy is on the ballot, you have to get these people back, and you have to start with, okay, how do I talk about issues to win these voters over? And I think, again, if you're talking from the progressive, like left, even socialist perspective, there is a way to do that. I think Bernie, in the first iteration of his campaign, understood it very well. I think less so in the second. I do think the activist wing of the party hijacked that campaign to an extent. But, to me, that's my ultimate view, that you've got to win these people, and you've got to figure out how to do it. Otherwise, you're just going to be the minority party in the Senate, in the House, and you're going to lose the White House.
Yeah, so I did want to just say, before I throw to Ryan, on the point that you made, Ross, about defund the police, I remember, when that first came up, I had, I had slightly mixed feelings, because some of the way that it was talked about, like the math didn't really add up. I remember AOC tweeting, "Oh, you want to fund all these important things, but people always say, where's the money come from?" Well, we found the budget line. It's defund the police.
Right.
And I wrote this article for Jacobin about it at the time, where I was like, well, hold up. you could literally reduce the operating budget of the NYPD to zero, and that wouldn't even close the gap between the best funded and the worst funded schools in New York.
No, not at all. Not even close. DOE budget in New York City is almost $40 billion now. NYPD, if you factor in even the overtime, is 10 total, and that's like generous if you're factoring in all the overtime. So yeah, I mean they're just not comparable in terms of numbers. But
yeah. I mean, like, so, and you haven't even done any of the other things that defund activists talk about. You haven't hired any social workers yet, etc. So that's like, so that was always like kind of my criticism of it, that like I think it sort of exaggerated the how much money like you can get from just like rearranging the sort of crumbs in a municipal budget line. But then the thing that even at the time convinced me eventually that there was a kind of deeper problem with the slogan, even though it was pointing to something real, which is like, look, as you said, police power is, I mean, there are a million reasons to be critical of that. They do horrible, abusive things. The power imbalance between police and sort of working class people is obscene, and we certainly want to like demilitarize the police. But the problem, and this is both a messaging problem and like a substantive policy problem with it. And I remember this is the article, I just found it, that convinced me of it at the time. This is actually published in the summer of 2020 by Dino Gustella. It's called "To End Police Violence, Fund Public Goods, and Raise Wages." And one of the things that he points out in that article is, when we think about even police salaries, like you mentioned, we're often thinking about major cities where police officers are paid fairly well, but there's plenty of places where like there's plenty of the country where police wages are actually really bad, and that is in itself not great. People who are like authorized to use violence. I think making Walmart wages and being stressed about money.
Yeah, I mean even in New York City, starting salary for a police officer I think is under $50,000 a year, and you're talking about like a 22-year-old kid, getting a gun. Who's the type of person now, especially in this age of inflation, who's going to take that job like with no college degree, since you don't have to have a college degree. That's an issue, right? And then the pay structure really prizes seniority, and then you have all the stories which are very accurate about how police retire very early, at least in New York they do, and they collect these massive pensions, and that is a big issue. But yeah, I mean, the starting salaries in New York is probably higher than most cities in the country, are not very high. You don't get good quality people to do it. You get it's real mix. And I don't think you're getting better policing with just slashing like a department's budget in half. And that was always my issue with the defund advocates, where demilitarize made a lot more sense. I mean, again, I speak from the NYPD. It's a paramilitary organization in terms of how much weaponry it has, how much spying it does. It really is insane. And it's been that way now since 9/11. So paring that down would be great. But the idea you can just cut the head count of the police in half, and then magically you'll just pay for all the social workers and things will be great. As we know, it doesn't work that way. And Democrats, I think, are still paying for that 2020 messaging. Even if most Democrats and even leftists like Bernie don't run on it, you still pay for that being so vocalized, for all the NGOs taking up the cause, right? Republicans can run ads now about it, and they have the receipts, as they say. They're there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how, like, putting aside maybe the question of like what would have been possible in like this election, because maybe under the circumstances, I don't know. But like in general, I mean, this is something that has been driving me crazy lately, that I think the left, and in this case, like when I say that, I really mean like, the left. I'm not just using it as a euphemism, like,
right.
But I think the actual left, like, people who voted for Bernie Sanders and, read magazines that I read for and all that stuff, right, are, and like elected politicians who are aligned with, who are, at least ambiguously aligned with the left, just need to have a much, much better message about crime, because I think there's an overwhelming amount of statistical evidence that this is a major concern for working class voters who should be their base. And to the extent that the message in practice is, well, if you think there's something there to worry about, you're just wrong, or you've been fooled by the media, or you're you really like this is really like covering up for some sort of ugly prejudice or whatever, even though like every poll of Black voters specifically shows massive concern about street crime. And I think there are better things the left could say about this, that just for one thing, that there is actually a fair amount of criminological research showing that that if you have higher wages and give everybody health care and stuff like that, that actually does decrease street crime. Now, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know how exactly you could translate that fact into political messaging, but I'd like to see people try.
Yeah, definitely. I always think about how you can talk about this in a way that's not simply more cops forever, because
Right.
even that, I mean, even the easy way out, and rhetorically right, is not just going to magically make it all better. If you elect Republicans tomorrow and Lee Zeldin becomes governor of New York, you're still going to have these crises. And the mayor and the governor right now in New York are putting a lot more cops on the subway. Now, some of the crime is overstated, at least in New York, where the media and disingenuous people inflate or take statistics out of context. But yes, there is this very real fear and very real concern, particularly in communities of color, about crime. You cannot hand wave that away at all. For me, I think one of the big things the left really should talk more about, and I actually wrote a piece in Substack about this recently, is mental health treatment and psychiatric treatment, and really bringing back humane places where the mentally ill can go and live out their lives. Obviously, psychiatric institutions they were taboo. I don't know if they're taboo anymore, but we had this whole deinstitutionalization movement in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and it was well-intentioned, but ultimately from a policy perspective, it was disastrous, because you released many thousands of people out onto the streets with no adequate social safety net for them. The community healthcare centers were not nearly enough and were not up to the task of handling these people. And you can see almost a straight line between the deinstitutionalization movement and the rise in incarceration rates. In essence, a lot of people who struggle with mental illness went from psychiatric institutions, which were very flawed and had a lot of problems, I don't want to sugarcoat them, into prisons, which are worse. And we have to find a way of dealing with mentally ill people in cities, in towns. I think funding psychiatric beds, funding treatment. I mean, this is where the universal healthcare message comes back, because a lot of psychiatrists don't take Medicaid. It's such a Byzantine and expensive system. It really is a nightmare, and no one will fix it. So, mental health treatment alone isn't going to get you there, but funding a huge increase in psychiatric beds and facilities, I think could make a difference in the long term, even with the homelessness problem as well. And talking about ways to get people the treatment that they need. And that's where the conversation can get complicated, because there are those on the left who don't like the idea of a judge decreeing that this person must receive psychiatric treatment. But there are times where, an individual is in desperate need of help, and this is the only way they can be helped. So that alone is not going to,
or drug treatment.
Yes, drug treatment. And honestly, it's a broken system from top to bottom. And you see a lot of the crime, at least now in New York, that I see and read about, is committed by people who, quite frankly, if they saw a police officer nearby them, wouldn't even be that deterred, would probably just carry on and shove someone, on the subway tracks, because they're in this psychotic state. And this doesn't describe all criminals. You have many criminals who are not this way. But I do think this very complicated issue needs to be grappled with on the left, certainly, and I think other they're on the right as well, because the right doesn't really care about mental health treatment at all, or funding this, right? Or funding.
Oh, I mean, definitely not.
This. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that, my critique of some of the left on this is I think that we've become a little bit too libertarian about some of this, that I'm, just in a sort of basic values way. I'm a socialist. I actually want the government to help people. And so I think there's this sort of, I think, you mentioned issues about unhoused people. And I think oftentimes the way this plays out is that this sort of really dystopian kind of neoliberal fix of just let them sleep in the park is kind of taken as the humane option, it's look, no, certainly kicking people out without giving them a place to go is not better. But I mean, it's you have to, but ultimately what I want is for, certainly government provided, social housing, like real permanent housing, but also mental health treatment for people who need mental health treatment, addiction counseling for people who need that. And by the way, I don't think that can be entirely voluntary, because if you've ever if you've ever met an addict, right, that usually if it's voluntary, it will not exist. So that's the that seems like, and I also think there's also just a level on which to quote one of my least favorite people, it's the economy, stupid, is actually a reasonable thing to say about a lot of this stuff, because as far as crime that is not linked to mental health, drug abuse, etc. Look, I'm not saying oh, you just have a economically equal society and there's zero crime. That would obviously be ridiculous. People commit acts of interpersonal violence for all kinds of reasons, if you think about domestic violence and other things. But that said, if you think about the things that really drive up the rate of violent crime, there are not a lot of kids who grow up in the suburbs and end up joining gangs. And there is a reason for that, right? I mean, like the sort of primary drivers of that really are economic.
Another thing too is I feel like there has been a big rise in homelessness and in some of these street crimes, but you're not going to hear a lot of Democrats try to address not only homelessness, but also the fentanyl problem that is exasperating a lot of this. But it's a messy issue that's going to be expensive, and there needs to be a lot of structural change, and the Democrats aren't really interested in going to bat for those issues.
Well, homelessness, especially where you've had generations of failure on the left and the right when it comes to homelessness. I mean, one of the big policy disasters, along with deinstitutionalization in New York, was the utter obliteration of the SROs, the single room occupancy housing, which was very cheap hotel style housing where poor people, addicts, young people, people with not a lot of money and not a lot to their name could find a place to sleep at night. And this housing problem, it is in part a supply problem, and you get into the old YIMBY versus NIMBY debate. And I definitely think we have to build more. You have to build the right kind of housing, but you absolutely have to build more. And I do think some of this homelessness, not all of it, would be addressed with very cheap, readily available, and humane housing. And I go back to the SRO style housing because, the idea of having a room of your own is very important. In New York, you have a right to shelter. If that means going to the homeless shelter system, which is not a place a lot of people want to be. There are people who prefer sleeping outside to being in a shelter because it can be very dangerous. Your stuff isn't safeguarded. There are a lot of problems associated with shelters. Whereas if you have a room, you can have a room, you could have a bathroom or a shared bathroom, right? Certainly dorm living is something college kids don't mind. But I would say ideally the SRO styles that you build would have each their own bathroom and a little kitchen and a bed and something like that. And it would be far more humane than what you currently have, which is either a dilapidated shelter system or people just sleeping outside, the tent encampments, which is a huge problem on the West Coast, much more than on the East Coast, at least in New York. I mean, the West Coast tent problem really is, you go to Skid Row in LA, it is shocking to see it in person. And you have to get those people housing, and you have to build housing, and you have to get them mental health treatment if they want it. I think Ben brought up the issue of compelling people into treatment. It's a real discussion to have. There are people who will refuse, but if they are court ordered to get treatment, they probably would, and their lives may be better for it. So that's another conversation, a hard one to have. But I tend to agree with Ben where it's strange that you'll hear socialists talk, at least in the last few years, talk like libertarians, right? This idea that if you defund services, they get better. That was the argument coming out of the libertarian right for a very long time. We'll cut education funding, right? Or cut funding to roads or bridges and trains, and suddenly things will improve because people will be free and they'll pay less in taxes. We know that's not true. And the same is true on the mental health side. The same is true in the policing side. I mean, the prison discussion is a fascinating one. So on one hand, I think I support the ultimate goal of abolition in kind of the ideal abstract sense. But in the real day-to-day sense, the best prisons in the world are those that are well-funded. And you look at the Scandinavian model, for example, where these are true rehabilitation facilities where you go away for a certain amount of time, you get the wraparound services, you get training, job training, you get mental health care. They truly are facilities that try to make you a better person. So when you return to society, you are not going to commit crimes again. That costs money, right? You can't just say defund all the prisons and they'll get better. They won't. They'll be worse. And that's, again, not the easiest conversation to have. But I agree where the left really has to get off this libertarian kick when it comes to, I think, stuff like mental health, when it comes to criminal justice. You're not solving problems by slashing budget lines in half. At least I don't think you will.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that, prison abolition, I think is often a very poorly phrased way of saying what people are trying to say when they say it, which I think is that they think that if we have a better kind of society, we ultimately won't need prisons. I think that's what they mean. The reason I think it's poor phrasing is abolition means that you want to get rid of something overnight. Like Abraham Lincoln wasn't an abolitionist because he was a moderate anti-slavery candidate who wanted to gradually squeeze out the institution. The abolitionists were people who are like, no, we need to get rid of slavery completely yesterday. Whether we could ever have a society where you wouldn't need any sort of way of involuntarily detaining people, I'm a little bit more skeptical of. I think even in a sort of 23rd century advanced communist utopia, I do, again, I think there are other sources of interpersonal violence. Maybe I'm too pessimistic about that, but certainly what you said about Scandinavian prisons seems completely right to me, right? That like, look, you don't need to sort of speculate about a kind of society that doesn't exist yet and might come into existence in the future. Like Norway already exists. You can visit it if you want. And yeah, there they have both a much more liberal and humane criminal justice system than we do, and also much less violent crime. And, you can try to explain that away with, fairy tales about race or culture or whatever. But I would just, look, go watch The Northman. They're not just genetically nice people. That's social democracy. That like, it turns out that like redistributive economic policies actually work.
Well, the real left, I guess this would be a leftist idea that so many people don't want to embrace, and to me makes sense because this is also something the Scandinavians do, is a maximum prison sentence. This idea that there is a certain amount of time you serve and then you can return to society. And they fully embrace the idea of rehabilitation. And I say the left doesn't always embrace it because I do think, if at least you follow the rhetoric as Ben knows and Ryan knows online, right? On one hand, you're talking rehabilitation, criminal justice reform, but then if you encounter someone who's your political enemy or you disagree with them, or maybe they said something untoward, you throw them in the dustbin of history forever, and they can never be allowed back into a polite society. So I am someone, I fully believe in the idea of rehabilitation. And, I, for the record, I don't think you can have a society without prisons at any time soon. I think you need prisons. There are people who genuinely do bad things and should go there, but I do think the goal of prisons has to be rehabilitation, and it's better for everyone. It's better in a humane sense. It's better in a fiscal sense too, because it costs a lot of money to house a prisoner, and the idea of spending a lot of money to house a 75-year-old forever, it's silly. The 75-year-old, as heinous as they may be or have been, they're not a risk to go out and start killing people again. It's just realistically most crimes committed by the young. We know that, and yeah, it's again, no one wants to go there. But
no, for sure. I mean, and yes, I agree. I think there is at least some performative inconsistency in people who think that we should give rapists and murderers a second chance, but if you did bad tweets, in 2005, that's that, but yeah, I mean, I think that, I think rehabilitation is good. Although again, I think the point you made earlier is crucial, that that's not something you achieve by just, by slashing money. That's actually something, that you would need to put more money into the system to, in order to do that. I mean, you shouldn't keep anybody in prison. I love that about Norway, that there's no look, I mean, Anders Breivik is eventually going to get out of prison unless they change the system. And I know that's something a lot of Americans sort of choke on, but I think that's good. That's the way it should be. You shouldn't just lock people up and throw away the key forever and ever and ever. And again, I think if you have a more economically egalitarian society, and Norway is not the end point, but it's certainly many steps beyond, the United States, as far as that goes, then you could absolutely have a much more humane, prison system. You didn't lock up nearly as many people for nearly as long, without having lots of crime. And I think that, and by the way, what actually has been shown to be correlated, I think, in pretty good studies with lower recidivism rates is higher wages, which does make some sense intuitively. But I think that right now I guess I would just say, maybe just to move towards wrapping it up and get everybody's final thoughts before going to the post game, that it's okay, so the one issue is about why the Democrats in general are most likely to not, to have a bad night. And the question is how bad, right? But, but it's going to be bad tomorrow. And we all know the answers to that. And we've been talking about it, but there is also I think this crime thing, we end up spending a while on it, but I think it's good because I think that's an example of a case where even the subset of Democrats who think the most things that all the people on the screen think, people, the subset of Democrats who, we think of roughly as, Bernie-crats or whatever, are often really awful when it comes to talking about this stuff in a way that's compelling, that, that actually, makes, I mean, you're right. Bernie Sanders, I think, was better than a lot of the others on it. But I mean, I think if you're going to have an electoral left that's going to be successful in the future, I mean, they're just going to have to do a better job of crafting a compelling message about this stuff. All right, let's on that note, let's kind of get everybody's last thoughts before we end the main show. Ryan, you want to go first?
Sure. I actually wrote a post today about the idea of the most important election of our lifetime. I was interested because I heard it again today, and I did some research, and turns out, yes, there it is, that the most that phrase had been used over the last 20 years was the election of 2004. And so if you remember that was Kerry and Bush's battle. But there were so many celebrities and musicians and politicians that invoked that. And it just seems like we're stuck in this cycle where we keep saying that over and over. And not to say that this election isn't important, but we have to have some perspective. And sometimes, hear all of this screaming rhetoric about how democracy is going to die tomorrow if we don't get the results, or that the world is going to end, is a little crazy, because I think we're going to probably wake up on Wednesday and everything will pretty much be pretty similar. So that's to say, go vote.
Yeah, well, go. The world's not ending, but on the other hand, Kevin McCarthy does say that he wants to raise the ages for Social Security and Medicare. So that'd be a pretty nasty thing to do to people who are, by the way, actually looking at the trend lines, dying earlier. So
and his base.
What's that?
And it's his base.
Yeah, that's true too. But which is why they're not running on that. They're running on they're running on the saying on like fear mongering about trans stuff. It's like, the Democrats want to turn boys into girls. They're running on
litter boxes.
Sure, right.
And inflation. It's just litter boxes and inflation.
Litter boxes
and crime.
Litter boxes, inflation, and crime, right? So it's
yes.
I think I think on the first one, no, don't be an idiot. That's not true is actually a reasonable message. But on the second two, I think you need to do better.
Let me guys ask you this real quick. Do you think that if the Republicans have a wave of any kind, are they going to try to make this like a 1994 Contract for America type of election where they have this like big sweeping mandate to do whatever they want?
Well, I guess what I would say to that is, as long as if Biden is president, they can send things to his desk that he'll veto. I don't know if the Republicans know what they want to do with power. I mean, that's one of the
and Democrats do.
Democrats they have a better idea, I would say. I mean, you look at Biden's 2 years and the Senate and the House. I mean, things got done. It wasn't always what you wanted, but the idea of getting infrastructure spending done and something Trump couldn't do, having Medicare negotiate drug prices, the Chips and Science Act for semiconductor chip manufacturing, and these things will matter. Whereas the Republican Party, I mean, I think it's genuinely torn in a way, and this is something gets elided by left liberal media because, in essence, to most of them, all Republicans are Trump Republicans, all MAGA. And that's true to an extent, but you do have a difference between like the Rick Scott Republicans and Kevin McCarthy to an extent, who are talking about these really insane social safety net cuts, whether it's raising the age on Social Security, on Medicare. Rick Scott had this very bizarre plan that Mitch McConnell basically had to shelve and say, no, we're not running on that. You have differences on foreign policy. You have the classic neocon wing of the GOP fighting with kind of this isolationist wing, where if I had to choose between the two, I would choose the isolationist wing over the neocon wing. So I don't think the Republican Party knows exactly what they want to do with power. In some sense, some of their big ticket items were accomplished already, stacking the Supreme Court, the judiciary. McConnell and Trump did all of this already. So it's an outstanding question as to what they don't want to do, because I don't think they know what they want to do. There's no real policy platform. It is very much culture war, plus, talking and talking all the time about crime and inflation, which makes sense. But again, what will they do about crime and inflation? That is the question that they're not eager to answer, because it's not good politics right now to do that. And they may not have the answers.
Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely correct. I don't think there's much that they have up their sleeves on crime and inflation. I think that the worst case scenario is that some of these like Dickensian things about Social Security and Medicare happen. They've already been talking about using the debt ceiling to sort of coerce concessions on stuff like that.
But isn't this a repeat of the past, like over and over? I mean, the whole like privatizing Social Security and using the debt ceiling, that's like old playbook right there.
No, it is
Yes.
the old playbook. Although I would point out that they have, like there's a reason this isn't a playbook they've abandoned. They have gotten concessions from this stuff before. It's not a total thing, but but they have gained stuff from this before. And I also think that they're going to try to rein in the NLRB and the Labor Department because they think it's too pro-union. I mean, look, the best case scenario, like if I could, somehow control this, like the best thing I could hope for is that they just waste the next 2 years holding hearings about Hunter Biden. So,
Which they probably will, right? They're going to impeach. I think impeaching Biden is plausible at this point, especially if they get a nice majority in there. Hunter Biden is on the table. And yeah, Ben's right in a way. That would be probably a gift to the Democrats if they just squandered 2 years on impeachment stuff. It would probably make Biden a vaguely sympathetic figure and enhance him in someone's eyes. So
that would rule. I would totally love if the Republicans did like a January 6 hearings, but with Hunter Biden's,
Hunter Biden's
iPhone movies. Like they did like this slick.
It's weird porn stuff. It'll all be there. Hunter's coming to DC. I think you can punch your ticket.
I'm here for it.
It's like there's so little political content. It'll just be like Hunter's like years of playing Kendall Roy, and that's No, I like it. I think here's the real last question. So there's been a lot of talk that Donald Trump is going to declare for president in 2024, shortly after the midterm. Is God in his mercy going to give us the funniest possible outcome, which would be a long, bitter Trump versus DeSantis primary?
I don't know if DeSantis has it in him to run against Donald Trump. People think he does, and he will, and this is his time to strike. And certainly it can be argued politicians only get so many moments in the sun, and this is his, and he's got to seize it while it's there. At the same time, he's not going to beat Trump in a primary. So I think he has to decide, is it worth it for me to go through this and to get my 30% or whatever the percentage will be and just get beat by Trump in a lot of big states? And that's a serious serious amount of decision making he has to do, right? Do you run in some ways DeSantis would be trying to attempt like a Bernie against Hillary, though. I'd say,
although I think it'd
DeSantis,
be more like Martin O'Malley
probably more like Martin O'Malley than Bernie. And it's just, Trump is the king of the party. Trump is the alpha, and I think people lose sight of this sometimes. And I think a lot of journalists like DeSantis more, and there's a lot of mainstream conservatives who like DeSantis more. He's like the perfect marriage of the MAGA GOP, but also he seems so much smarter and well-spoken and all those things. But Trump is the king, and he runs the party. So I have no problem in terms of making predictions with this one. This is an easy one for me. Trump, DeSantis. Trump wins the primary. He's the nominee. I don't see how DeSantis gets past him. That being said, will DeSantis do it? I have no idea. I have no window into his soul. I couldn't tell you, but I could tell you that more Republicans like Donald Trump. I mean, I wrote this a while ago, and I don't know if enough people, Democrats, liberals, leftists, progressives have accepted this, all stripes of the party, that Donald Trump is the modern day Ronald Reagan to a lot of Republicans. He's in the pantheon now with Reagan as like their most popular presidents. George W. Bush is completely canceled, which honestly is a perfectly fine outcome considering who he was. But Trump is the guy, and you talk to the average Republican, and they just have nothing but reverence for him. So DeSantis has got to decide, does he come at the king?
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, with that, I think we are going to call it a day for the main show, and we are going to go to the post game. If you're a patron, you should already have a link to that in your email. Ross, where can people find your work?
You can find me lots of places. So New York Magazine, I write for them. I'm also a contributor at The Nation. And you can also read my Substack, rossbarkan.substack.com. I encourage you to do that and subscribe. I really are enjoying doing my Substack, and I do a lot of New York stuff, but also a lot of national stuff and a lot of politics and cultural analysis and from my left perspective. So I think you should subscribe to me.
Nice. And Ryan?
You can find me in the war room here, advising national security. No, I'm kidding. I'm a regular contributor with Jacobin, and I have a Substack, Third Rail, and here and there. Just look around, you'll probably find me.
All right, fair enough. Well, we're going to go to the post game. For patrons, I should say, next week's regular episode, we're going to have Harvey J.K. on to talk about the reissue of his book, which was just reissued by Zero Books, The British Marxist Historians. Really looking forward to that. Haven't talked to Harvey in a minute. Yeah, this is actually true. You can also find Ryan Z hosting trivia at select Atlanta locations. That is a fact.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll trivia, by the way, on Thursday night. So come on out.
Well, were you going to tell people where?
No.
Corner Tavern.
Corner Tavern. All
down,
right,
down in the corner.
Yeah, little 5 points, right? I thought they.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. All right. But in any case, so got Harvey JK next week. Right now, we are going to go to the post game. Ryan, Andy, and Anders Lee. Gonna keep talking about the elections. Ross, hope to see you again very soon. It was a great conversation as always. So I will see some of you in about 90 seconds. Ross, I'll see you another time very soon. Left is best.